absences that remain difficult, not because nothing survives, but because what survives appears too orderly for disappearance to sit comfortably inside it. A building continues its assigned purpose. A lamp remains where duty placed it, and the mechanism built to prevent danger still functions against darkness. Some records begin with violence already visible. Others begin with testimony already fractured. But certain records endure because the first facts remain disciplined enough that the explanation arrives only after sequence has already become difficult. The Flannan case belongs to that second kind, because what entered official writing in December of 1900 did not first appear extraordinary. It appeared delayed. A lighthouse stood on a remote Atlantic island west of the Scottish mainland, where routine mattered precisely because the surrounding sea did not forgive interruption easily. The island was Eilean Mòr, the largest of a small group of exposed rock formations known collectively as the Flannan Isles. They rose abruptly from the Atlantic water, isolated enough that landing itself depended on weather, tide, and judgment rather than simple arrival. No settlement existed here. No village softened its edges. No ordinary civilian life unfolded beyond lighthouse duty itself. The island had long existed more as an outline than a destination, known to fishermen, marked in navigation, approached only when necessary, and otherwise left to weather. Its cliffs rose sharply. Its surfaces were uneven, wind-cut, and resistant to easy movement. The Atlantic did not surround the island as scenery. The lighthouse built there had not existed long. It entered operation only the year before, commissioned under the authority of the Northern Lighthouse Board to reduce navigational danger along routes where Atlantic conditions made precise coastal guidance essential. Its presence was practical, not symbolic. A tower, keeper quarters, supply systems, signaling responsibility, and daily routines governed by exact repetition. The work did not require drama. It required constancy. Lights must appear when required. Mechanism must be checked. Fuel measured. Lenses cleaned. And the weather observed. Signal discipline maintained. Nothing about lighthouse labor was mysterious to those who performed it. It belonged to the long maritime logic of ordinary duty carried out where reliability mattered much more than comfort. 3 men were assigned there during the period now preserved in record. The principal keeper was James Ducat. With him served Thomas Marshall. The 3rd man present that month was Donald MacArthur, serving temporary in the place of another assigned keeper, absent from that rotation. No surviving record suggests any of them entered that month under unusual notice. They were experienced men within a system built on reliability. That detail matters because later mystery often weakens itself by attempting to enlarge personality beyond what evidence permits. The stronger fact is simpler. Nothing in the surviving record requires extraordinary expectation. Before the interruption began, the lighthouse functioned according to schedule. Rotations were established in advance. Supply and relief depended on transport arriving when weather allowed. Communication did not belong to modern immediacy. Delay at sea was neither rare nor immediately alarming. A vessel expected later than planned did not automatically imply danger, especially in December, because winter Atlantic conditions regularly imposed patience upon maritime procedure, and so when relief did not occur at its earliest attended moment, no immediate crisis entered record. The men remained where they were expected to remain. The lights continued where it was expected to continue, and for a time, nothing in official sequence required the event that later entered history to be understood as anything more than postponed routine. That is where the record remains strongest, because before absence became mystery, everything still belonged to ordinary order. The vessel assigned to relief was the Hesperus, operating under the practical authority that governed lighthouse maintenance along the Scottish coast. Its task was routine: transport supplies, rotate personnel, confirm operational continuity. The relief originally expected earlier in the month had already been delayed by weather severe enough to make landing impractical. This did not yet disturb official confidence. Winter conditions around exposed Atlantic islands often altered schedules by force rather than preference. A postponed landing belonged to maritime reality only when delay lengthened beyond what ordinary interruption comfortably explained did attention begin to sharpen. By the 26th of December 1900, the vessel approached Eilean Mòr under conditions calm enough to attempt landing. The sea had eased sufficiently for approach, though not enough to remove caution. The island appeared first, as it always did. Dark rock rising abruptly from surrounding water. The lighthouse visible above elevation rather than integrated into landscape. Nothing in distant view immediately announced disorder. The tower stood. The station remained intact. No visible structural damage appeared from offshore, sufficient to explain crisis at first sight. And yet, one absence entered notice before landing began. No keeper waited at the landing place. This mattered because arrival of the relief vessel was expected. Under ordinary procedure, some visible acknowledgement should have appeared once the vessel came within range. A signal, a figure, movement near the landing path. Instead, the island remained still. This alone did not yet produce alarm. Men inside station buildings might fail to hear approach immediately. Wind altered sound. Position on the island could delay response. A few minutes still belonged comfortably to explanation. But as the vessel held position and no answering sign emerged, silence became harder to treat as ordinary delay. The ship's horn sounded. No reply followed. Another signal. Still nothing. The first man seen to shore was Joseph Mòr, whose own assignment had been to join the station as relief personnel. That detail matters because Mòr did not arrive as investigator. He arrived expecting ordinary handover. He climbed from the landing point upward along the steep path leading toward the station buildings. The ascent itself required effort. The terrain offered no gentle transition from sea to lighthouse. Stone steps and exposed ground carried a person upward through wind-cut elevation, where visibility opened gradually rather than all at once. Even before reaching the main quarters, something remained wrong through proportion alone. The station should have answered his presence. A door opened. A voice called. Movement crossed visible ground. Instead, only the wind moved. When Mòr reached the station entrance, he found the outer gate closed. Inside, one of the doors stood unsecured. He entered, and immediately the absence changed from delay into fact. No men were present. The interior did not resemble panic. No visible struggle announced itself. No obvious destruction interrupted the room. The order of the lighthouse remained largely where duty had left it. Beds had been used. The kitchen showed ordinary occupation, interrupted rather than abandoned through visible violence. Most important was what failed to appear. 3 men whose entire duty required continued presence inside that structure. One detail entered official memory strongly enough to survive repeated retelling. Oilskin outerwear associated with severe weather duty did not fully match what ordinary departure might suggest. At least one set remained absent from its hook, while another appeared still inside, creating immediate uncertainty as to whether all 3 had left under equal expectation. This detail matters because lighthouse men did not ordinarily step into exposed Atlantic weather carelessly. Clothing choices belong to judgment formed by habit, and habit among experienced keepers rarely abandoned caution without reason. The light itself had not failed permanently. The station had not burned. The machinery had not collapsed. Everything necessary for explanation remained too small. And that is where official discomfort begins in records of this kind, when the environment remains usable, but the people required by the environment are gone. Inside the station, the first minutes did not yet produce explanation. They produced inventory. Rooms were checked in practical sequence. Sleeping quarters, storage areas, operational spaces attached to lighthouse routine. Nothing in these rooms suggested prolonged abandonment. Nothing indicated that the station had stood empty long enough for neglect to become visible. The interruption appeared recent enough that ordinary order had not yet dissolved. That fact made absence harder, not easier to absorb. One clock within the quarters had stopped. The detail survives often enough to remain attached to the case, though its exact interpretive value cannot be fixed with certainty. Mechanical interruption in such a station did not automatically imply event. Clocks fail for ordinary reasons, but in a room where no men answered and no voices entered, even ordinary failures acquired disproportion. The kitchen retained the quiet shape of interrupted routine. No evidence supported violence. No evidence supported hurried struggle. The strongest surviving fact remained restraint itself. Nothing large inside the station matched the size of disappearance already becoming apparent. For that reason, the search widened almost immediately beyond the building, because if explanation did not stand inside the quarters, it must still belong somewhere on the island. Joseph Mòr returned outside and began searching the visible ground nearest the station first. The logic remained practical. A fall, an injury, a delayed response. Some ordinary course still seemed more likely than complete absence, but the immediate surroundings yielded nothing. No voice answered when called. No movements appeared near paths leading between station structures. No figure emerged from lower ground. The island itself remained exposed enough that concealments over distance did not come easily. That mattered, because Eilean Mòr was not a landscape dense enough to hide experienced men without reason. It was open rock, broken surfaces, abrupt drops, and weather-shaped elevation. Search attention moved toward the island landing points. The eastern landing offered two more regular routes under calmer circumstances. The western landing existed under harsher exposure, where Atlantic force reached the rock directly when weather turned severe. It was there that later official attention concentrated. At the western landing, physical signs appeared that did not belong to ordinary stillness. Equipment normally secured for handling cargo and rope work showed disturbance. A storage box had been displaced. Ropes lay irregularly where careful station order usually prevented loose exposure. One section of railings above had suffered damage consistent with heavy sea force striking upward against the rock face. These details did not yet prove sequence, but they narrowed probability, because the western landing was not a place men visited under poor conditions. To descend there during severe weather required reason, and if one man had gone there under necessity, the possibility that others followed became increasingly difficult to avoid. What mattered most was timing. The damage existed at the same moment. 3 men did not. That overlap invited the first explanation strong enough to enter official writing seriously. That some urgent difficulty at the landing had drawn one keeper outside, another after him, and eventually the third. Yet even here the explanation remained incomplete because lighthouse procedure normally prevented all three from abandoning station duty together. At least one keeper was ordinarily expected to remain within operational control. That rule existed precisely because exposed stations demanded continuity, and so, even before formal investigation deepened, one difficulty remained. If all three men had gone out together, something unusual had already interrupted ordinary judgment before the sea completed whatever followed. The station could not remain suspended in first discovery alone, because lighthouse duty belonged to a system that required written conclusion, even when events themselves resisted one. Within days, formal inspection followed under the authority of the Northern Lighthouse Board, and the responsibility for the inspection fell to Robert Moorhead, whose task was not to preserve mystery, but to determine what sequence best match the surviving physical evidence. That distinction matters. Institutional writings does not begin by asking what is strange. It begins by asking what remains usable enough to support the report. When Moorhead examined Eilean Mòr, he encountered the same central difficulty already visible to the first men ashore. The station itself remained too intact for catastrophe of obvious scale. The light structure stood secure. Interior order remained largely disciplined. No fire had entered the quarters. No visible collapse had damaged the tower. No signs suggested intrusion by another vessel or violence between men, or even prolonged abandonment beyond the immediate interruption already evident. And because large explanations remained absent, attention returned again to the western landing. There, physical conditions carried greater interpretive weight than anywhere else on the island. Moorhead recorded evidence of severe sea impact. A box normally secured above landing level had been displaced. Rope and equipment showed disorder beyond what routine handling would leave behind. iron fittings fixed into the rock had suffered strain. Most significant was visible damage to the path and structures near the landing point itself, damage consistent with powerful Atlantic force striking upward against the surface, usually approached only with caution. This mattered because the western side of the island did not forgive poor judgment. Its exposure made ordinary work there conditional, even for experienced keepers. To descend under worsening weather required reason strong enough to override habit, and habit among lighthouse workers was built precisely around avoiding unnecessary exposure. From these conditions, Mòr had assembled the explanation that entered official record most strongly: that one keeper had gone to secure equipment endangered by storm conditions or wave action near the western landing, that a second keeper, seeing difficulty, had followed, and that the third, abandoning ordinary station rule under immediate pressure, had also gone out, perhaps to assist, perhaps because the first two had already entered danger beyond manageable control. The sea under this reading completed the sequence quickly enough that no one returned. It remains the strongest official explanation, because it requires no event beyond what the island itself already demonstrated. And yet, official strength did not remove all discomfort, because one procedural difficulty remained impossible to ignore. Experienced keepers knew the danger of that landing. They understood wave timing, rock exposure, and the cost of poor position under Atlantic force, which means the official explanation satisfies physical evidence comfortably, but not as much human behavior. That does not weaken it, but it leaves one narrow tension intact. Why all three men allowed ordinary station discipline to fail at once? The station log became important partly because people naturally look there for final sequence. But here caution becomes necessary. Several dramatic final entries, commonly repeated in later retellings, do not stand on equally strong documentary footing. The most famous versions survive largely through repetition after the case had already entered public imagination. They do not carry the same certainty as the physical inspection itself. What survives more securely is simpler. Weather entries existed. Routine recordings continued, while duty remained ordinary. Unofficial chronology places severe weather close enough to the disappearance that Atlantic conditions remain central to any responsible explanation. The strongest surviving record remains smaller than later retellings wishes it had been. 3 men were present. The station remained functioning until interruption. The western landing showed storm violence. The men were never found. That sequence entered official writing, not because certainty survived, but because enough physical evidence survived. And that prevented complete speculation while still leaving completion just beyond reach. In the years that followed, explanation did not disappear. It multiplied. The first explanations remained closest to the official reports. A wave striking the western landing with unusual force. One keeper pulled or knocked from position. A second descending to assist. A third abandoning station because hesitation had already become impossible. The Atlantic requiring only seconds after that. That remains the most structurally complete explanation because it uses no elements beyond what the island itself already demonstrated. The western side of Eilean Mòr was fully capable of violence sufficient to move heavy equipment and damage fixed structures above ordinary reach. A man positioned badly there during severe surges would possess little margin for correction. And once one body enters that force, instinct easily overtakes procedure. Even experienced men remain human before impact. Yet, alternative explanations persisted. Some questioned whether the weather conditions recorded elsewhere fully matched the scale later assumed necessary. Others returned to the clothing detail. Still, others focused on professional habit itself. 3 trained keepers did not ordinarily abandon lighthouse continuity together without clear, immediate cause. None of these objections overturned the storm explanation, but neither do they disappear entirely. This is why Flannan remains durable, not because the official explanation is weak, because it is strong enough to persuade while still leaving one space narrow where certainty never seals fully. Later decades added what many unresolved records inevitably attract: stories larger than evidence, voices heard in storm wind, last words imagined, supernatural claims imposed upon an island already isolated enough to invite projection. But those additions belong to later imagination, more than December 1900. The strongest surviving record remains far quieter. 3 experienced men assigned to lighthouse duty, a delayed relief vessel, no answering signal, an intact station, signs of severe sea force at the western landing, and no recovery of those who disappeared. Perhaps that is why the case continues to hold unusual weight, even among many maritime losses, more severe in scale, because larger disasters often leave clearer violence. Flannan leaves proportion reserved. The island is small. The station is orderly. The explanation is plausible, and still the human mind resists how little remained between ordinary duty and permanent absence. A lighthouse exists to answer uncertainty before ships reach danger, to impose reliability where sea offers none. Naturally, at Flannan, the structure fulfilled the role longer than the men assigned to sustain it. The light remained part of the system. The keepers did not, and what entered record afterward was not enough to witness the final moment, only enough to preserve the 3 ordinary men passed from assigned duty into a sequence the Atlantic did not return. What is recorded remains. The record remembers.